Superhumanize. Accelerated evolution.
What if the way we live is completely out of sync with how we're actually designed to function? We're talking about our internal clocks, our circadian rhythms, and how they impact everything from our sleep and energy levels to our metabolism, mental health, and even longevity. My guest today is Lynne Peeples, an award winning science journalist and author of The Inner Clock Living in Sync with Our Circadian Rhythms. She's written for Nature, Scientific American, The Atlantic, and Time, covering the science behind how our bodies interact with the environment. Her latest work dives deep into how modern life, artificial lights, late night screens, irregular eating patterns, and so forth, is throwing off our biological rhythms and what we can do to fix it. In this conversation, we'll break down what's happening inside our bodies on a 24-hour cycle, why so many of us are struggling with sleep and energy, and how small changes, like when we eat or when we get sunlight, can completely shift our health. Lynn, welcome to the Superhumanized podcast. Good to be with you.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. And what we are going to dive into is actually so timely, especially with a change of year. We just spoke about it before we press record. You are fortunate in Seattle today. You have sunshine. It's dreary here in LA. It gets dark so quickly. And of course, all these things are also tied to our circadian rhythms. And
Yes.
your personal journey really fascinating me. Your personal journey into circadian rhythms and their impact on human health is actually very compelling, as compelling as the science. You spent 10 days in a Cold War era bunker without clocks, without natural light. And that's a pretty bold way to immerse yourself in that field.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what did you learn about yourself and the human connection to time during that experience? And how did it shape your perspective on circadian rhythms and their importance?
Yeah, I had just started learning about circadian rhythms from, in the end, it was hundreds of scientists I spoke with.
Mm.
But I went down into this bunker for 10 nights to really get a sense for myself, the role they play and how they coordinate the body to do the right things at the right times and how they need calibration from our environment to do those right things at the right times. So by hiding from any daylight and not giving myself those cues to keep my body tuned to the 24-hour Earth day, everything just went bonkers. My inner clocks, which we have trillions of these little clocks. Basically, every cell in your body has a clock. And these were designed, evolution designed these to coordinate together to make sure you're doing those right things at the right time. So whether that's metabolizing food, digesting food, whether it's defending the body from like an invading pathogen, sleep, all these things are tied to when during the day is best for that. And the body is prepared to do those things at those times. But without those cues, when I was in the bunker, it was like an extreme case of jet lag.
Huh.
Most all of us have experienced that, right? Traveling across multiple time zones, our body clocks get confused. They lose that attachment to the 24-hour Earth day. And so on my clocks, which I have data to support, I was collecting data on my heart rate, on my temperature, all these things which reflect the different rhythms of the body. They just fell out of coordination. By like halfway through my time down there, they were not in sync anymore. And I could feel like my gut felt horrible. I had headaches. I was tired at odd times, and my mood would really fluctuate. And the data supports it. The science is continuing to support that. There's many consequences to our when we lose that coordination and our circadian rhythms get disrupted.
Yes, and there's particular topics that I really want to take a closer look at, from certain biological functions to also mental and emotional health. Real quick, how can we imagine this experience for you? Was it literally complete darkness for 10 days. I know a friend did a cave retreat for, I think it was 6 days for her. And there would be double doors. So even the food that would be brought in, there was never any, not the tiniest sliver of light at any time. Was that same?
So this was a little different. There was zero daylight and there
Mhm.
were zero clocks and there was zero contact with other humans. But I did so this bunker I stayed in, let's just to be fully honest, it was pretty luxurious. It was this guy had bought this former missile silo that held a nuclear missile during the Cold War era. He bought that from the government and he souped it up into this luxurious Airbnb. So I had pretty nice surroundings during this time, but the lighting was controllable because this was pretty modern. And I put all the lighting in the bunker to a dim red light.
Mm.
And red light is the color that we understand to be the least effective on our circadian rhythms. So that's why I set it there, and it was dim. So I had light. It was odd. Everything lost color because there was just this dim red light in my around me. But yeah, that so I could see. It was definitely not like that darkness or that light deprivation
Mhm.
thing that I understand people are doing.
Yes, I think something that happens when they do the complete light deprivation is they also go into an alternate state, which a lot of people who have experienced both liken to psychedelic experiences. So it is really fascinating how
Yeah.
our surroundings, what we expose ourselves to or not expose ourselves to, has such a profound impact. And we're talking about, with the circadian rhythms, we're talking about an ancient biological mechanism that's deeply rooted in our evolutionary biology. And it's so fascinating how this governs everything from sleep cycles, of course, hormone productions, mood. And in your experience and during your research, and also what you talk about in your book, The Inner Clock, what would you say is the most misunderstood aspect of circadian biology, both for the general public and also within the scientific community?
Oh, that's a good question. I think big picture wise, still I don't know if most people is fair to say, but a lot of people I talk to, they hear I write about circadian rhythms and the one connection they make is sleep. And it's not to say it doesn't have to do with sleep, but as you just said, circadian rhythms rule so much of our physiology. In fact, it's probably fair to say all of it. There's not a body system that's not impacted by these rhythms. And so when we mess it up, it's not just that you might not sleep well tonight. It's that plus all these other things that could get out of sync, which can throw off your body's equilibrium. And science is building now that it could raise risks of chronic diseases, increase your risk of developing diabetes, obesity, even Alzheimer's down the line. And it's hard for people to connect these dots sometimes. The impact on a day to day basis is subtle, right? You're not going to it's not like you burn your hand on a stove, you know that the stove burned your hand. This is something that's happening behind the scenes. You can't see, you can't hear these metaphorical clocks ticking, but it's happening. And because it's so hidden and subtle, it's taken a long time and a lot of modern new research to start connecting these dots and see these long-term implications. So I think it is just understanding, yeah, the profound impacts on our life, all the way from our very first days, even before we're born in the womb, circadian rhythms have a role, and then all the way to the last of our days. And
Mhm.
yeah, as you said, it's mental health, it's our physical health. It took me a long time to make the connection that a lot of my mood swings, seasonal affective disorder is a very real thing. A lot of the mood swings I had as a kid, I'm like, it's only now that I'm really connecting to some of these impacts that seasonal time changes and all these things can have on us.
Yes, and I think another factor is also when our health declines, and potentially on many different levels. Let's say we're not living with how we are biologically supposed to live within the circadian rhythms. So when you just incrementally start feeling worse, you may not notice it by day to day, right? You will be just, it's normal. It's just how I feel. But if you would be able to jump into your skin, let's say you had issues with insomnia for 5 years, and you could jump into your own body and mind 6 years ago, and then jump back to where you're right now, you would
Right.
probably be shocked because you would notice a drastic difference in well being. But if you just get a little bit worse every day by these
Right.
chronic issues, you are not even as alarmed because you just think it's normal. Or a lot of people even say, "Oh, it's just aging or whatnot," which has been debunked by a lot of scientists, actually.
Oh, absolutely.
And also another thing that has such a huge impact on this is our modern lifestyles. You also talk about in your book all this artificial lighting, the round the clock schedules, or these very strict set schedules, like when you go to school, when you
Yes.
regularly go to work. All of this seems to pit us against the natural rhythms. And so if you can give our audience a bullet list, so to speak,
Yeah.
a bullet list of what are the most significant ways that our modern environment disrupts circadian rhythms, and what are, you mentioned some, but what are some of
Yeah.
the long-term health consequences we should be most concerned about, just to highlight that again?
So this is going back. We evolved outdoors. We also evolved at the equator, where we had 12 hours of light and 12 hours of dark year round. So that's the context, right? And today in modern society, the statistics suggest that most of us spend at least 90% of our time indoors. And our indoor environments have, like, they just cannot be compared to the outdoors. The light we get is a fraction of what we get outdoors. It might look bright to us under our artificial lights, but that's because our visual system is very different from our circadian system. The circadian system needs light to be a lot brighter, and it's really reliant on certain wavelengths of light, especially blue wavelengths of light, which the sun provides. But our artificial lighting is just, yeah, it's a fraction of both of those, both the intensity and the certain wavelengths. So we're indoors most of the time. A lot of us don't have easy access to windows, even. And then, yeah, we go out for brief little bits of light. We, as you've hinted at, we eat at all hours of the day. Again, when our ancestors evolved, they ate during the daylight hours. They would hunt, they'd bring home food, all the things revolved around the Earth's light dark cycle. And we have found ways to create our own light dark cycles. And it's that contrast in the day has really been lost. We keep our lights on at night, and during the day, the lighting really isn't that different. We're not going from that bright daylight to that dark night. So that is really the primary issue with the modern world and its detriments on our circadian rhythms. It's really that contrast. We're losing that contrast. So our bodies are not getting the memo that it's day and the memo that it is night. Also, a lot of people just recently, we changed our clocks again, right? For daylight saving time back to standard
Oh,
time. Yeah.
yeah. I don't know how it is for you, but for me, once it starts getting dark at here, it's like between 4 and 5 in LA. I know it's a natural process, but I get so tired. When it's 7, it feels like it's 11 PM to me.
Yeah.
I think it's a disaster.
Right. And that's there is the big debate. Most people are probably in agreement now that we shouldn't keep flip flopping our clocks. But to what time should we all set our clocks? And that is the big debate. And I too, I don't love it getting dark early, but the scientists do have me convinced that if we had to go permanent to one or the other, standard time is the most biologically accurate, healthy for our rhythms because it's that morning light
Mm.
that really helps set our clocks. And we need that morning light. And at least up here in Seattle, if we went on permanent daylight saving time, like this time of year with these super short days, the sun wouldn't rise till 9 or even later. And the kids going to school at these early morning hours, which is its own issue. High school starting at 7:30.
Yes.
That's it's not only unsafe to be like commuting in the dark, but they're not getting that light. They're not getting that help with their own circadian rhythms. So yeah.
Yeah. And you wrote, I think it was in Time, you wrote a really great article on the health implications of daylight saving time.
Right, exactly. So
I
yeah,
recommend
that's
looking
yeah.
I
I think
recommend looking that up. Oh gosh. What do you think is going to happen? How do you think anything is going to happen with this debate now? Are policymakers going to implement changes that will actually benefit us and follow the science here?
It's really hard to say. Administration is changing. There's probably other priorities, but there is a big push. There's a lot of scientists and advocates now trying to raise awareness about the importance of standard time. But there already had been a groundswell and more popular opinion push towards daylight saving time. I don't know. It seems like there's a bit of a stalemate right now. The way laws are currently written federally, states have the option to go on standard time. We don't need Congress to change anything. Like that already is allowed in Arizona,
Yes.
has taken advantage of that. So some states are also, just to avoid having to keep the flip-flopping going, which is unpopular, that is actually helping push some to consider going standard time year round.
Mhm.
So that is the easier move. But again, maybe not the most popular yet, although some of the surveys are changing a little bit. Some people are getting the memo that for their
Yeah.
bodies, it might be best to go standard.
All in good time.
Yes.
Something else you just mentioned, well, when you talked about going to school and the time also. So there is,
Yeah.
first of all, there's individual differences in chronotypes, whether someone is an early bird or a night owl, and that of course adds another layer of complexity to how we interact with time, how we function with it.
Right.
And then so there's not only the chronotypes, but there's different stages of human development. I read some really interesting studies a while ago that very clearly said that young people, children, and also teenagers, they have very different needs with regard to sleep, to brain development,
Right.
when they actually have the full capacity to study, to squeeze everybody in these rigid time frames from young people to these are the working hours. Of course, now we have a lot of night shifts, which if you're a daylight person, the night shifts will wreck you. It's this one size fits all. It's just really disastrous. And what role should understanding chronotypes play in designing work schedules, school start times, and even healthcare interventions? Because this is something else
Yeah.
interesting. Talk about in your book.
Yeah. Oh, this stuff really fascinated me. So as you mentioned, we do all have different chronotypes, which means the inner clocks within us are ticking a little differently for you and I. And most people think about early birds and night owls, and there's everything in between, and there can be pretty extremes. There are some people who biologically actually do better being awake at night, and that
Yeah.
is genetically programmed. This is actually true. But yeah, so society really does generally cater to the early bird. Schools, let's go with school start times. As you also mentioned, our clocks change throughout our lives. So when we're young, when we're really young, we don't really have rhythm. We're waking and sleeping at all hours, right? New parents know this too well. And then as young kids typically do rise early. And then when they hit teen years, when you hit adolescence, on average, clocks get delayed. It could be like 2, 3 hours. That means those teenage kids who are up late, a large part of that is biologically programmed. And it can be exacerbated by things like screens and Snapchat and everything else. But they are generally biologically predispositioned to want to be awake longer. And that's the time when most schools start earlier. Elementary schools might start later. For me, it was like 9 a.m. for elementary school. And then by the time I was in high school, it was like 7:25 a.m. for the start time. And that's biologically backwards, as a lot of scientists explain it to me. There's a growing trend to try to help reverse that and try to help delay school start times for middle and high schools, and maybe make the elementary schools start earlier to align those clocks with the inner clocks of these kids. But it's a slow process. Change is hard. And
Yeah.
yeah. And then same for workplaces, it's similar because, again, given the breadth of different chronotypes among us, a lot of people are left out of being able to live according to their clocks. They're forced to get up before their clocks would like to, which means their bodies, most likely not primed to be most productive and healthiest. And that's lose-lose for them and their employer.
100%. I can think of a couple of friends that I have that just, gosh, they are not real night owls. They go to sleep maybe at around 6 or 7 a.m. Both of them, thank goodness, are not tied to a work schedule that they need to adhere to now. One of them, when he was still working, he would actually volunteer for night shifts and excel at them. But that was a particular line of work. If most work days are you don't have the potential for night shifts. It's fascinating, giving me much better understanding because one of them said, just think about if if he was expected to rise at 8 a.m. and go to work at 9, he says, just think about if somebody woke you up at 2 in the morning and expected you to go to work and function at 3 in the morning, which
Yeah.
would be grueling. And I also remember, to your point, as a teenager, and I was at a boarding school, and it was miserable to get up early and then make your brain work to maybe even have to take exams at school. I had a quite a big problem with that, as did some of my mates, but I remember it was especially at 15, 16, it was not good, the mornings,
Right.
yeah.
And then you're cutting off these kids. Well, you're cutting off the sleep, you're truncating the sleep. And it's those last hours of sleep that you get the most REM sleep. And we know REM is crucial for like healthy brain development, for ability to remember things in school, for the ability to, control behavioral impulses, all these things. And it's really a disservice, as you
Yes.
suggested, to these kids.
Yeah, good sleep is so important, and, the data shows sleep disorders are on the rise, and often they're linked to circadian misalignment, so,
Right.
this area is actually becoming a critical area of research. So from what you know, Lynn, what practical strategies do you recommend for people who are struggling with sleep issues that are
Yeah.
caused by circadian disruptions?
Absolutely. The first thought there, just to piggyback on what you said, it's more the time or the when of you, the when of when you sleep, the when of sleep is at least as important as how much. So, really timing your sleep window to when your body is most inclined to sleep is becoming, the evidence is growing of how critical that is. But a lot of us don't even know when our body wants to do certain things because we've been trying to fit ourselves, pigeonhole ourselves into the schedule that society has forced upon us, our employer's schedule, right? So, as a scientist suggested to me, and I tried to do for myself in figuring out my own rhythms, the best thing to do is really to try to take a vacation. To find some days where don't have obligations, you don't have to set an alarm, and then just listen to your body. When are you tired? Go to bed. When do you wake up naturally without an alarm? And then when during the day are you feeling most energetic? When do you feel most alert cognitively or most like a pep in your step, most with it physically? And taking notes of that because all these are ebbing and flowing throughout the day. And then you could align your schedule if possible or try to find some wiggle room to give yourself opportunities to do those things at those times of day, whether it's sleep, whether it's to really focus on your hardest task of the day. But yeah, overall, to your question of sleep, finding that optimal sleep window is crucial. And then taking a step back, I really like the data pointed to three really key things that I took away that really would help keep circadian rhythms in alignment and help your sleep. And the first is that contrast. So trying to get your days really bright, especially the morning, trying to get light first thing when you get up, whether it's just getting outside for 20 minutes to walk to coffee or at least being by a window. And then at night, cutting the lights, really trying to not have, especially those bright overhead lights, just trying to work with table lamps, candles, whatever, just try to dim the lights and try to especially remove the blue wavelengths of light. So try to use those warm colored lights. So that's
Mhm.
contrast. The second thing is to constrict the hours that you eat. So the more and more data is suggesting that has a powerful role on helping our circadian rhythms, and then some really fascinating emerging science on how that could affect our longevity and reduce risks of chronic disease. Just if you can try to eat maybe 10 hours during the day, and especially cut it off 3 hours before you go to bed, if at all possible. Try not to consume any calories. And that includes liquids with calories like wine. Really trying to cut that off. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, and then the last thing is consistency. So contrast, constrict, and then consistency. And that is like going to bed at the same time every night, trying to eat at the same times, train your body around and help it support its natural rhythms. And that's where, again, going to bed at the same time every night is important, especially if you, I mean, it's most important to do that at the time that the body actually wants to. So be consistent with your natural rhythms.
No, right now I just want to go to sleep at 6. That's totally fine. Oh gosh. And yeah, those are all very good suggestions, Lynn. And to add something on to piggyback on what you just said, especially with alcohol, I'm not adverse to having a nice glass of red wine, or when it's cold, maybe scotch. I don't drink much, but maybe anything between 2 to 4 drinks per month. And when I do, I really enjoy it. However, the sleep does get affected when your body has to detox from the toxin that alcohol is.
Yeah.
You just won't sleep as well. And something I really have loved and have implemented for many years, I used to be a huge fan of wearing big sunglasses all of the time, and I just stopped wearing them. So, because to your point, we don't spend as much time outside as our ancestors did. So, when I do go outside, I just have no sunglasses on. Okay, if I'm driving and there's harsh light for safety reasons.
Right.
But when I move about outside, I really try to get unfiltered light into my eyes, which is so important. Something else that you just mentioned, longevity, the inner clock and longevity. And in your book, you also suggest that living in harmony with our inner clocks could potentially extend longevity. What are the insights that you have uncovered about the relationship between circadian alignment and aging?
Yeah, so this is just really emerging research as well. So a lot of this isn't super concrete, but there are a lot of hints that, yeah, by supporting robust circadian rhythms, and that's not only keeping these clocks in alignment, but keeping them strong, which means really a strong drive, like a melatonin rise at night. So your sleep, you feel really inclined to sleep. And all these in metabolism, having those just be really robust as long as possible throughout life. Scientists are finding that what's directly and indirectly linked to longevity. So that's going to decrease your risk of developing a lot of chronic diseases that tend to shorten both the quantity and the quality of our years. And the Alzheimer's, the dementia links are fascinating. And the science is suggesting it probably goes both ways. So it looks like circadian disruption might drive the onset of dementia, make it that happen earlier in your life, as well as the changes in the brain that happen with neurodegenerative diseases could also cause circadian disruption. And you think about, in general, like an older person, and especially somebody with dementia, they can be in and out of sleep all day. There's not really a distinct day and night. And this is what's this pointing to a lot of exciting possibilities, not only for prevention, but also for, if you think about assisted living facilities or wherever an elderly person lives, trying to feed them as many of these circadian cues, especially trying to give them that bright light during the day and that darkness at night. Studies are starting to suggest that really does help a lot of these symptoms and potentially stave off further neurodegeneration.
Mhm.
So I
That
find that really fascinating.
that makes a lot of sense, Lynn. And you mentioned it at the beginning of our conversation that we have these countless millions and millions, or I don't, the correct number escapes me right now, but every single cell has an inner clock, so to speak. And when we dive down to the molecular level, the circadian rhythm is orchestrated by these core clock genes and proteins that maintain this 24-hour long cycle through feedback loops. And that Really fascinating science. So, can you give us some more insight into how these disruptions in the expression of these core clock genes? I think you say it's capital letters. Correct me if I'm wrong. Clock. Do you say BMAL1? How these contribute
That
to
is
this?
one of the clock genes. Yeah. And it's that whole, those feedback loops are continuing to be more finely understood by scientists.
Mhm.
And I don't get into it too much in the book, but there are like some competing hypotheses a little bit in how this works. But there seems to be a lot of interacting, kind of multiple feedback loops going on. So we have these clock genes that are coding for various proteins, and those are building up and breaking down based on that programming throughout the 24-hour day. So it's that process of building up and breaking down. And these loops are interacting in a way the big picture loop should be happening at about 24-hour pace. And again, as you said, I mean, we have trillions of cells in our body, and just about all of those have clocks, if not all. And so if those are coordinating on the same time scale and building up and breaking down at a similar 24-hour pace, then they stay coordinated. But if they're not, then that robustness of those ebbs and flows of various things in our body, like hormones and various other signals, get muted, or they get sent at the wrong times. And that is forces our body again to do the wrong things at the wrong times, or not really get the memo to do things. And one of the big implications there that has probably gotten the most research is on metabolism. And that's
Mhm.
where we see these links to obesity and diabetes. If insulin levels are not at the right place to deal with incoming food, for example, that can throw our glucose levels off and drive potentially the onset of diabetes.
Yes, and something that also struck me as I was researching this is how these disruption in the expression or the function of these core clock genes, how it they now link it to systemic health issues, metabolic disorders, or
Yep.
even cancer. And of course, you just mentioned the metabolism, which is also tied to, in a sense, to our GI. And then you look at the circadian influence on the gut microbiome, where it's been shown that the microorganisms in our gut, they also exhibit circadian patterns, these microbial populations and their functions fluctuating over the course of the day. It's really, I think it's so important to not underestimate the effects of circadian rhythms and to not just be like, I just don't sleep well. It really has such an incredible impact. And another aspect of this is you talked about how, it's important to eat at a certain time of day. I think you also bring up the something that's if we look at chronotherapy, the
Yes.
timing of treatments to align with circadian rhythms, there's been promise that's been showing, I think, in the fields of oncology, even also in psychiatry. And this approach of chronotherapy could actually revolutionize how we administer healthcare. To your knowledge, how far has chronotherapy advanced in clinical settings, and what challenges remain in translating circadian science into more widespread medical practice?
That's where the scientists are really hoping to see progress. So clinically, we're not seeing a lot of this in practice at all yet. But the science is continuing to point to, like you suggested, really profound potential here to both increase the effectiveness of drugs and decrease the side effects.
Mhm.
So, again, because all our physiology is tied to these rhythms, that means that the breakdown of medications and the metabolizing of those medications and the effect they have on a certain system based on the time of day that system is working in. There's many reasons why timing could have significant effects on how well a drug works. So the first real clinical trial of this idea in cancer therapies is underway right now. And this is a group out of Washington University in St. Louis is leading this trial. And they had done a retrospective study looking at a drug that is commonly used for glioblastoma. And they looked at retrospectively when a patient took this. And the data suggests that taking this drug in the morning help these patients live about 3.5 months longer than similar patients who took the same drug later in the day. And that's profound. This drug was FDA approved to extend survival by, I want to say, I don't know, 2 months or something like that. Don't quote me on that. But it's longer. Like the effect is longer than the drug itself was approved to benefit the patients. So again, really a significant potential improvement. But of course, we're waiting on this clinical trial, the gold standard for medical research, to see if that holds up and what that looks like and what the effects on side effects and such. But this keeps coming up over and over again as scientists look into the effectiveness of various drugs. And this includes over-the-counter drugs for blood pressure, for migraines. But as you suggested, there are roadblocks. It's hard to, for example, ensure that a patient is going to take a drug at a certain time of day. So where does that come into play? And if you think about chemotherapy units, if we know a chemotherapy drug is going to be better at certain times of day, you can't have everybody in that chemotherapy unit at the same time every day. But here's also where technology could be helping us down the line, because now people can take their chemotherapy home and take it at all times of day. And there's pumps you can program. And there's various ways, I think, that we can overcome a lot of these obstacles. And this goes all the way even to early research studies to just start taking time into account, because it hasn't generally been taken into account. And it does complicate research, because once you add time, that's a lot more variables and a lot more combinations of things that you have to then study. So it's not going to be really smooth sailing here, but there is potential. There's low-hanging fruit that might be initially targeted. And if there's profound effects shown, maybe more researchers will be inclined to pursue that end.
I certainly hope so. And I agree with you, what you brought up with regard to technology. I'm also a techno-optimist in that sense when technology is deployed in ways that actually elevate our human experience. We've talked about how technology is often a culprit in circadian disruptions, such as the blue lights from screens, for example, but it also holds potential as a tool for circadian health. Are there any technologies or innovations that you see as most promising for helping people align their lives better with their biological clocks?
So I talked about artificial light and its problems, but again, technology is potentially reversing that to say now with LED lighting and new technology that allows us to tune those LEDs to different intensities and different wavelengths, we're getting closer and closer to being able to mimic daylight indoors. Nothing will ever quite be as good as the real thing, but we're getting closer. And as soon as right now it's the Wild West, there's companies promoting a lot of these products that they say you're going to fix your circadian rhythms and such. But as we get more standards and more regulation on a lot of these products, I think there is a fair bit of potential there to at least create an environment indoors that's far better than what we've been exposed to over the last few decades, especially as we transition to LEDs. Those standard LEDs are not great, especially at night.
Yeah.
They're also, I don't know, for me at least, they seem really glary. I go into a restaurant or a friend's home with these bright LEDs overhead. It's not good.
It's awful. I have a physical reaction the few times when I have to go into certain stores or locations where they just have these bright LEDs, these fluorescent lights. I recoil. There's something inside me that literally goes, it has for me, I'm very sensitive to it. And as a woman also, or as any person who likes to look nice, not to
Right.
just some women in a restaurant, please have some nice lighting. We
Exactly.
could into looking nice. Put like some overhead light that makes it look like a zombie. Yeah, hello.
Yeah. Oh, I'm with you. I'm with you. So hopefully, yeah, we can have the best of all these. We can have something that's aesthetically pleasing that makes us look good, but also does tells our body the
Yeah.
appropriate time of day at the appropriate time. So yeah, there's tunable lights that that was really the start of this whole journey for me was seeing these tunable lights recently. Well, this was several years ago now, but I went into the locker room of my hometown Major League Baseball team, the Seattle Mariners, and they had installed circadian lighting in the locker room. And they programmed those lights to be brighter and bluer before the Mariners took the field, and they programmed them to dim and be warmer after the games so the players could sleep better. And that was the whole
Excellent.
idea there is to help their rhythms and help them do the right things at the right times. And that technology, yeah, improve over time and being used in more schools and offices and sports facilities and the like.
Yes, I love this example you just shared. And to button this conversation up, what do you envision as the next major breakthroughs in circadian research and also how it may help reshape our understanding of human health?
That's a big one. I think some of the most exciting stuff I do think is in the circadian medicine realm, but that and it overlaps a bit. So the US government is funding some projects looking into these living pharmacies that we can basically ingest. This is directed right now to help military personnel, but these would essentially be transplanted or ingested within us, and they would read the hormones in the body and kind of help it tell the time of day and feed then the body what it needs. For example, they're looking at this to help military personnel quickly change their rhythms. So if they have to travel far to respond to an emergency or go to war, they could land on the ground thinking it's daytime, regardless of the time of day, but have their circadian rhythms synced up. But this same technology we could potentially use for anybody to help adjust to jet lag or recalibrate clocks to, if we think about this paired with circadian medicine, if we know that, for example, a certain surgery is going to be more effective at a certain time of day, if a person comes in for that surgery, or if they come in after having a traumatic incident and need some treatment, could change their clocks so they're at the time that they're most apt to respond well to that treatment or that surgery.
That is
Um,
really fascinating, Lynn. How far advances the research or even the deployment of this?
yeah, I think it's still a little ways off. I can't give you an exact time frame, but this was a few years ago that I first started hearing about it. And some scientists at Northwestern University are involved in this project. But it's also just one of many. So there's that. There's a lot of funding going into that because again, that's coming through the federal government and a lot of excitement over the military implications. But there's also other scientific groups looking at just a pill
Mhm.
that somebody could take to quickly change their rhythms. There's a group at Stanford looking at these flashes of bright light while we're sleeping. Subconsciously, our brains can be getting these pulses of light, and that also could potentially tune our clocks pretty drastically, shift them by a few hours overnight. Also could help us adjust to jet lag, or maybe it could help teenagers adjust their rhythms so that they can actually get up in time for school and be rested, which maybe changing the school start times is could be the
Yeah.
better option there, but maybe to fill the gap, that could be a tool too.
Yeah.
Oh, some pretty
Oh,
wild ideas out there, but
yeah. I love it. I'm here for it. And
yeah.
Lynn, this has been really a great conversation. I learned a lot, and people who want to do a deeper dive into your work or connect with you, of course, they can read your fantastic book, The Inner Clock. How else could they connect with you or even reach out?
Yeah, you can find me at lynnpeoples.com. I've got links there to both the book, my other work, ways to reach me directly. Yeah, lynnpeoples.com.
Great. Thank you, Lynn. It was such a pleasure to spend time with you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.